Hello and welcome to this game review. So this was an interesting opening in which, as you mentioned, there were some problems calculating forced lines. So let's take a look what happened. So it started quite modestly. I would generally advise taking the center as white if possible, otherwise we're not really trying to get an advantage. But okay, e3, this is kind of fine. Black plays some kind of double fianchetto. And here queen c2 and b4 is played. Generally, again, we should take the center in chess, and here we can play the move e4, transposing into a normal kind of King's Indian position. After e5, we can take or we can play d5. Either way, white has a little bit more space, so he should be objectively slightly better. b4 is kind of a move about nothing. We don't really help ourselves with this move. a5 is played. After b5, rook e8, preparing e5. Again, white can take some space. After e5, we can even play the move d5, which looks strange giving up this square, but we can play a slow idea of playing g3 and f4, and then f5, slowly gaining space. This is kind of how the computer would play. This isn't really necessary, but if we play e4, we have to respond with d5 next. And bishop e2 is played, it's fine. And here white takes on d5, but this is completely unnecessary, exchanging the pawn on d4 for the pawn on d6. So in general, we shouldn't get rid of tension unless it benefits us. And here white clearly has some moves that help his position, for example, rook a d1. If black wants to get rid of the tension like this, we can improve our knight, or even take back with the pawn, exchanging these two. But maybe improving the knight is better, trying to fight for the square on c6. But and if black goes e4, which is maybe what we were scared of, black is not really in a good position to attack on the king side at this point. He can try, but our idea of playing c5 is quite quick, so black is not really getting anywhere. But of course it is playable. But now, had black taken back like this, the position is quite fine for black. Maybe white is slightly better, as he still has the idea of knight d5. After this is generally viewed as a mistake, keeping the pawn on d6, and here white should actually be the one avoiding the exchange with knight d4. This knight is looking at the c6 square, which is slowly but surely going to be taken. For example, white can play f3 and then e4 and then knight d5. Black will have to take, and we will eventually get this square on c6 and also the c file. Another idea is to play f4 to kick out this knight, exchange bishops on f3, this way gaining the c6 square again. And white has more space with this pawn on c4 against this one, and potentially another pawn as well. But again, white got rid of the tension, but again, there was no reason to get the tension off the board unless we are getting something. And this just helps black improve his position. And with this bishop here and this rook here, we can imagine something bad happening. So now knight d5 is played, but this is the tactical mistake and the important point of the game. White is trying to gain some kind of material advantage or something similar. For example, if rook e8, I guess we can just take here and play rook a d1. Though this again doesn't really achieve too much, but it's understandable why white would want to play like this. But of course, the most important part is knight takes d5, and we cannot take because of knight b4. And this is a line that really has to be calculated correctly. It's not that difficult because here, what are the candidate moves for black? Well, there's not that many. Checks, captures, and attacks. There's not any checks. Captures, well, rook d5 or knight d5. This is, of course, easy to calculate. There's not really much else to continue with. So knight d5 is the only line to consider. And after this, clearly our point was not to take here, though this is also an important line. Our point was to take the rook, but now checks, captures, and attacks. So of course he can capture, but this is kind of easy to calculate again. Though even here, interestingly, black can just take the rook on a1. So this line was also badly calculated. But even more importantly, knight b4 attacks the queen, gaining the bishop on the next move. And the black will have two pieces for the rook. So this was all badly calculated. After this, white understood that he has to take. And here, black has to take on d5, otherwise, for example, rook e8. This is quite a bad position for black, because this bishop on b7 is completely useless, and white has this very nice plan of doubling or tripling on the c-file and picking up the pawn on c7. But now, after bishop takes g7, black had to find the only move in the position which is good enough for the advantage, which is a very forcing move, rook g5, and this is a very typical mistake, automatically recapturing. But on every single move that we play in every single game of chess, we have a choice. And here, to find the best move, we have to realize that we have a choice. From black's perspective, checks, captures, and attacks. Well, there aren't any checks. There is one capture, basically attacks, and this creates the threat of this windmill tactic, which will clearly give black more than this bishop. So white has to react, and after this, black is a pawn ahead. So instead, king g7, but now bishop f3 skewers these pieces, so black is losing material. He decided to lose a whole piece instead of the exchange, but this is not a very good idea. And from here, white managed to realize his advantage. Of course, there were some mistakes. For example, here, there was no reason at all to get rid of the tension again, so this was the third time in this game that white relieved the tension without getting anything. And the comment was that white was concerned about any passed pawns. But this is a bit vague. It's not clear what passed pawns we are concerned about, as none of these pawns can now move. If black takes here, this just helps us activate the rook and we can bring the king. Otherwise, d5 is impossible, b5 is impossible. So this vague fear should have been addressed more thoroughly, because this is usually why we're getting rid of tension. It's usually because of ghosts like this, like passed pawns, but there are no passed pawns here. So instead, black's rook is advanced, and black got quite a bit of counterplay here. The king arrived, and at this point the position is not really even winning. Well, it probably is winning, but black's passed pawns are quite powerful. He can start pushing them, and it's not really that easy to win anymore. I don't think a strong player would win against an engine at this point. But somehow white managed to win. The pawns didn't really get going, and the rook was hung, so this was good enough. But hopefully this was useful. And of course, we have to calculate very thoroughly, and we have to make a list of candidate moves on every single move. Of course, the natural line here was that this should happen, I guess. But as you can see from the lines that we analyzed, there are quite a bit of more candidate moves to discuss, so we should calculate a bit more thoroughly and correctly.